aqua friends, welcome to my channel. I was on vacation when I filmed this, so I apologize for the quality. So in this autumn inspired watercolor landscape, we are going to be working with some very pretty fall colors. Starting off wetting our paper. This is a wet on wet watercolor technique. And thinking about watercolor in layers, we have to start with the very background layers. So I'm laying down kind of like the forest thing that we can see in this reference photo, which is just very light, shadowy colors of the foliage. So just with some very warm browns, also use some yellow ochre. Trying to draw fairly organic but yet straight lines for the trees. So I like to turn my paper upside down sometimes. And what is your favorite watercolor paper to work with? I have been trying out the Honeymoon watercolor collection series, but I did go back to Arches, and I was just curious what you guys like to use. I think I might do a tutorial comparison of these watercolor papers. I mostly use Princeton watercolor brushes. This is the Black Velvet series. And for this painting, I mostly used a size 8. I did use a script liner brush as well as 1.5 flat to do the wetting the background. So after that first layer dries, you have to just keep looking. What is the next layer that you see in that reference photo? What is the next value of color that you see? So I'm starting to draw in the trees that I see. There's still a lot of trees that are still part of the background. I wouldn't say I'm in the middle of doing the midground yet. But that's how I go about looking at a reference photo. I just pick it apart in layers. And if anybody does any digital art, you'll know what I mean. You might have a very loose background for your first layer, and then your second layer, you're starting to see a little bit more detail. So then you will draw in, some of those shadowed background trees that you see. Okay, and then your next layer, your colors shift again, and you have a little bit of warmer colors because now we're starting to get into those mid-tones. So that's what I'm painting right now, is the mid-tones of these trees and getting those drawn in. The paint that I love to use is Holbein paint, and what do you guys think of Holbein or whatever paints that you are using? If you could leave comments what your favorite watercolors are, and if you've ever tried Holbein watercolors. I do love tubes versus pans. I actually did do a video about paints, so if you guys are interested in that, make sure you check out my tips and tricks playlist. As you can see, I got stuff flying all over the place. I'm painting outside. There's a fall leaf that fell there. Now with the foliage, see, I'm starting to do the foliage that's a little bit darker. This is mostly just like sepia that I'm using, just a very watered down version. The strokes that I'm doing are maybe a little bit more defined. My leaf for inspiration as I paint. So when I do this texture, I'm just, really, it's just all these like little marks that you're making, all these little hashtaggy type of marks. And you know, it's just a process. The foliage, because they're such small, tiny marks I'm making, obviously this does take a long time. So everything is still quite light, as you can see. There's nothing very fantastic about it, and it looks kind of boring, but it does get better, and we are building up our layers very slowly. It's easier to go darker, and it's not so easy to go lighter. So I typically like to start off light, and actually, you know what, the more layers that you do, the more of a dimension that you get with your painting as well. I mean, I could be really bold and go in with some really dark colors right off the bat, but it probably won't look as natural. So now I'm putting in the sun rays that are coming through those trees on the right-hand side. I am using ISO Yellow Deep for this. I just love this color. It is such a beautiful yellow. It's very much looks like egg yolk yellow. So it's very, very warm. So once that dries, I am now concentrating on starting to put in some of the landscape part of things and actually lay down my colors in the forest. So there is a lot of leaf green that I'm using here for these very, very vibrant greens that I'm seeing, and that's because the sun is shining on the greens and making them look kind of on the yellow side. It's just such a pretty reference photo. This was a lot of fun to paint. And the path, I'm using some burnt sienna, but it's actually quite orange, but I'm building up slowly first. So I'm laying down that burnt sienna first. I'm not just going in with a neon orange because it just wouldn't look right. I like that transparent pyrrole orange, man. I'm always using that color. I'm addicted to it right now. Some of the browns that I used were Van Dyke brown and sepia. I also used sap green and hooker's green, putting in more of the greens. While it's wet is when I'm laying down all these colors here. As you can see from the reference photo, there are many trees. I probably didn't even draw in all the trees that are actually in this reference photo. I'm trying to mimic it, but I don't need to copy it tree for tree type of deal. So I am slowly going darker and adding those broken branches that you see. Because as you're getting into the middle and the foreground, you also want to include more details of the subject that you're painting. Now the midground of this landscape is lit up by the light coming through the forest on the right-hand side. So these trees have a lot of warmness to the bark, and I used a lot of the burnt sienna. So it already just automatically, with the colors that we're using, has a very fall feel to it. Adding in all those little marks and ticks. So I'm re-wetting the ground area, and I'm going to darken that up now, adding in more color, adding in some more vibrancy. And for different textural effects, once I add in these colors, I come in usually with a spritz of water maybe to get some tiny blooms. I'm using a script liner brush. I sometimes use a fan brush, and so I combine a lot of different techniques to get an interesting effect. Now, in the reference photo, the light rays are pretty defined. I mean, you could tell that the light is coming through, so I am coming in more bolder with my colors here of yellow. Okay, and at this point, that was not dry. My forest floor was not dry, so you can see I'm getting some blooms here, and I realized that I'm going to have to stop and let this dry in order to soften the light rays. So I removed some of the color and I let that dry. So now I am using a brush to soften the light rays by picking up some of the paint. This is called lifting. This watercolor technique is called lifting. I don't want it bam in your face, but I do want you to see that glow from the right-hand side. Okay, so here now what I'm doing is softening those light rays up a little bit. I have a wet 1-inch brush, and I'm going over those light rays and kind of wetting that down a little bit. It will fuzz the edges and it will look a little bit more natural. Now I'm re-wetting everything, and I'm working on that forest floor and adding some more warmth. Coming in, there's my pyro orange, there's my favorite color, and that just does magical things to that path. It just goes so good with the trees, you know. It makes the trees kind of pop, and it just adds a lot of life to the ground area. So once that turned out, I was like, damn, I'm gonna put in some really bright leaf green too. Might as well get that whole area lit up like the 4th of July here with these bright yellows and greens and oranges. So I just kind of went crazy with my saturation. I'm not sure what I was thinking there. I've been fiddling with those sun rays like forever. Okay, give me a break. But you know what? Since everything's wet, it's dispersing enough that it's starting to look okay now. But at first, when I did that, I was like, oh my God, I just messed up the whole thing. That's the ugly stage of watercolor, guys. Remember I told you about the ugly stage. All right, I know, lots of layers, eh? Crazy. Okay, finally we're into the foreground trees. I can't believe it. Okay, so they're a lot darker, as you can see. So I'm using just straight up ombres, Van Dyke brown type of thing, and some sepia to really get in the darkest ones. Yeah, so I'm painting those in. That's starting to kind of start looking like, okay, we're finally getting somewhere after all those layers. Putting in more detail. Like I said, now we're working on the foreground here, so you want this to be as detailed as you need it to be. More detailed than the midground. It's really easy to get lost in your place when you're drawing so many trees. Adding in all those little broken fun branches and make it look very realistic. So adding in those little details makes the foreground really come to life. Love that pyro orange. Let's splash that a little bit everywhere. Sprinkle here, sprinkle there. So putting in a little bit of those shadows, there's some shadows, and I don't have the value quite as dark as the reference photo, but I did add some of the shadows on that left-hand side from the trees. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next week.